Welcome back. Today I'm going to try to add an added layer to the primers that you should have done by kind of creating videos and some thoughts around things that I would have been confused on if I was learning this for the first time. So I talked about these portions in previous videos. The primers I'm referencing are coming from, remember, the cloud, and then when you push on those three lines, or what people call a hamburger, you're looking for primers. And then you should have already worked through the two basics primers and realize that like all of this together is what's going to help you do the assignments for this week. Sometimes you might want to go back and just go to one of the functions like, hey, I forgot how to deal with packages, and you go to that portion of it. With the visualizing data, today we're just going to use exploring data analysis, bar charts, and then the customizing plots. That's kind of what we're working on. But use them how it feels best to you. I also wanted to point out that when you do these and it asks you to like write the code, there are functions of it that doesn't actually require you to write the code. So let's say here, if I didn't know how to write the ggplot for the geom bar, you can look at the solution and it tells you how to do it. That's a nice way to just practice and see how things are working. Also, if you're working on the project, it's a good thing to return to because you can pull that code out and then use it in the project that we're dealing with. So I'm really trying to make everything for the weeks align with what you've learned, and there might be obviously additional material that you've learned, but hopefully not too little material. Like you'll learn everything you need to know. Anything else that you don't know would be your own personal exploratory analysis. So, a couple of things. One, I am loading the library Tidyverse, and I'm choosing that instead of the ggplot2 because it includes more than just the ggplot2. So bigger library, easier to use, helps us to have everything we need. That's coming from the Tidyverse, but it includes the ggplot2, which is what is referenced in some of the primers. So we've dealt with the library that we're loading. We're loading the Tidyverse library. And one thing, and I mention this often, but best practice is for you to always start at the top of your code and work your way down. Even if you've already been in the code, at some point when you start a new session, you need to make sure you have your library loaded in and your data loaded in. It tends to be the case that the code is cumulative, so starting from the top and working your way down if you started a new session is best practice. For this example, the data that I'm using is actually already part of either base R or Tidyverse, or it's included and we don't have to upload it. These are just data sets that are included. And so you'll notice that I'm not reading in data. If you do have to read in data, you would want to do it around the time that you're loading in a library so that you know that the data is available to you. Because if you don't load the data in, you'll get an error. Now, to start out, this is part of the primer that you did, but I like to have that pulled out so you don't have to be in the primer to know that code. During the primer, it worked through writing out the ggplot, and then you do data, whatever your data is, and then you start with the geoms, and it talked about specifically how you have to make sure that you have a plus sign at the end of your line. Now for me, and this is one of the primers too, I like to make sure that when I'm writing code for a plot that everything is working correctly. So I like to assign my plots to, and it depends on, what I'm doing, but here I'm just going to assign it to P, and then as I add layers, I'm going to name it P1, and then I'll keep adding that way. The reason I do it that way, so I just created an object P1, and we know that we talked about this in a past video, but whatever's on the left is the object, and then we have a left-handed arrow that's assigning this to that object. The reason I do it this way is so that I know things are working correctly as I move through iterations, and it helps me to manipulate very specifically. You don't have to do it this way where you're assigning it to new objects. You can do it this way where you just keep adding layers to your ggplot and you don't actually assign it to anything or call it anything. Again, the reason I do it this way is so that I can call for just one thing, or if I want to see how things work differently, I might have like down here a P5A and a P5B, so I can change and see how I like things. So then once I got my data in, now I'm going to do a geom column. So I ran that. You see that over here in the environment window, P2 became an object, but it didn't print it. So this next line, if I run it, it prints my plot. And what that means is I just get to see it on my markdown pane, and it always goes to the bottom of your markdown. So here is my markdown, and then it goes to the bottom of the chunk of code you're working in. So it might not always be the bottom of your markdown, but remember that these dashes, these backwards apostrophes, are your code chunks. So 3 backwards is the start, and then 3 backwards is the end. So your printed value or printed graph will always go to the bottom of your chunk. Oh man, I talked too much. I forgot what I was going to say. So it doesn't actually print a physical piece of paper. It just shows you that. So if I were to get rid of that, I don't have to have that as part of my markdown. I usually just call for it to make sure that my graph looks the way I want and that it's working correctly. So I have the column, and just, I guess, hot second. The reason I'm doing column is because the 2 variables that I'm dealing with here are both quantitative. So this is actually a type of scatter plot. It's kind of weird, but it's a type of scatter plot. It just doesn't have the points. And instead of a point, it's putting a whole column up to that point. And so this is a version of a scatter plot, but it's 2 quantitative variables. And then I'm filling it by the diet type. So you can see that in my legend. So it's got different colors for the different diet types. And I'm just going to remove the size. Doesn't need it. So I have P2, and then in P3, I'm faceting, and that was part of the primers that you did as well. That just means that it's putting different graphs onto different locations based on one variable. Here it's going to be the diet type. And then in P4, I'm adding labels, and this was also part of the primer. You can add different titles. You can label the x-axis. You can label the y-axis. You can add subtitles. You can add captions. You can also annotate, which that was part of one of the primers. So just different ways to deal with that. And again, I'm assigning it to an object called P4, just so down here, I can make sure P4 is running, and then also I can adjust and see which of these themes do I like best. So here, when I run P5A and P5B, when you run them together, you'll notice that it gives you 2 different plots. So this is P5A, this is the first one, and you can see what that black and white theme looks like. And then P5B, this is the classic, so you see that it takes out any of the grid marks, I guess is what I would call it. So the last thing that I want to point out to you, because I don't know is that it's emphasized enough in the primers, but when you do these, the layers are going to start replacing what was above it. So the newer the layer, like if you change something, like here you'll notice I have subtitle classic theme. You see here it says subtitle classic theme, but up here I called it by diet. So as you're adding layers, it will override something above if you ask it to. So like here, because I added a new subtitle, it replaced the subtitle I had previously. So keep that in mind, because sometimes I will think to myself, why is that not showing up? And then I realize that I had either overwrote it based on a new line, or I'm not using the right plot for it. So remember to keep yourself organized. And also it does help to have notes for yourself on what you're doing and what each of those items means. So this isn't as descriptive as it could be, but it does help to have some notes like, oh, here we're adding a theme. That's how you do it. Here I'm adding labels. This is how you do it. As you progress and get to have more and more complex graphs, trust me, having these things written out is valuable for you. Like also, on the application assignment, I am going to adjust the orientation of the x-axis labels. And to do that, I will have a theme, and it matters where I put that and where this type of theme is. So writing that in the comments, remember to start with a hashtag, can be extremely beneficial. So you remember in future graphs that you're creating, oh, I had to put that one in first, otherwise my classic theme won't show up. So I meant to have this be a compliment to the primers. I think the primers are better than what I can do teaching you like this, but I do think that it's valuable having some insight and just another way to view something. So if you think that there's something missing, either in the primers, the notes, or these videos, please, please, please reach out to me and tell me. I would love to add it for future students or even for you right now in this semester. So I will see you in future videos. Happy coding!